The warm Detroit sun filtered through the diner's windows, casting golden patches of light on the red vinyl booths and checkered floor. The scent of sizzling patties and freshly brewed coffee filled the air, creating a comforting ambience that drew Jack Wilson in like a moth to a flame. Today, Jack was not in his usual police uniform. Instead, he wore a simple t-shirt and jeans, his badge tucked away. This was his day off, a rare moment to unwind and shed the weight of his responsibilities. Jack had been a regular at this diner for nearly a decade. It was a place where he could simply be Jack, not Officer Wilson. The familiar chime of the door announced his arrival, and he was greeted by the hum of conversations and the clatter of dishes. His eyes quickly found a familiar face. "Morning, Jack," Emily called out, her smile warm and welcoming. She was a young waitress with an easygoing demeanor, and she had served Jack countless times before. "Morning, Emily," Jack replied, heading towards his usual booth by the window. The view outside showed a bustling street, but inside the diner, time seemed to slow down. Jack settled into the booth, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. He looked forward to his usual, a juicy burger with extra pickles. Emily approached with a menu, though they both knew he didn't need it. "Just the usual, Emily," he said with a grin. "Coming right up," she replied, jotting down his order, even though she knew it by heart. As Jack prepared to dive into the comforting routine of his day off, he was suddenly interrupted. A heavy hand slammed down on the menu in front of him before he could open it. Startled, Jack looked up into the eyes of a man he didn't recognize. This man, burly and stern-faced, was definitely not Sam, the usual manager. "Hold on there," the man said, his voice tinged with hostility. "Are you lost?" Jack's brows furrowed in confusion. "Just here for a burger, like always," he replied, keeping his tone calm. The man leaned in, scrutinizing Jack from head to toe with a disdainful look. "This isn't the place for folks like you," he stated bluntly, snatching the menu away and tossing it onto another table. Jack's heart sank as he processed the words. The air in the diner grew tense, the friendly chatter fading into an uneasy quiet. He looked around, seeing the other patrons avoiding eye contact, their faces a mix of discomfort and silence. "Folks like me?" Jack asked, his voice steady but laced with rising anger. The man scoffed. "Yeah, folks that look like you," he said, his gaze piercing. He then turned away, leaving Jack sitting there, a storm of emotions brewing within him. The once comforting smell of burgers now left a bitter taste in the air. Jack sat frozen for a moment, grappling with the blatant discrimination he had just faced. This diner, his sanctuary, had suddenly become a battleground. The initial shock slowly turned into a simmering resolve. Jack knew he couldn't let this go. This moment, as painful as it was, sparked something within him, a need to stand up, not just for himself, but for anyone who had ever been told, "This isn't the place for you." Jack stood, his heart pounding as the man's words echoed in his mind. "This isn't the place for folks like you." The hostility in the manager's voice was unmistakable. He felt a mix of confusion and anger bubbling up inside him. This diner had always been a sanctuary, a place where he could escape the pressures of his job and just be himself. But now, it felt like a battleground. Taking a deep breath, Jack walked over to where the manager stood, his demeanor unyielding. "Excuse me," Jack began, trying to keep his voice steady. "We need to talk about what you just said." The manager turned, his eyes narrowing. "There's nothing to talk about. I told you to leave. This place isn't for people like you." Jack clenched his fists, struggling to keep his composure. "You can't refuse service to someone based on their race. It's against the law." The manager scoffed, a mocking smile playing on his lips. "Oh, the cop's going to lecture me about the law? That's rich." Before Jack could respond, the manager shoved him hard in the chest. Jack stumbled backward, colliding with a nearby table. The clatter of dishes and the gasps of diners filled the air. The once comforting atmosphere of the diner had turned tense and hostile. Jack's police training kicked in. He straightened up, his training taking over. "I didn't want it to come to this," he said, his voice firm. He stepped forward, ready to defend himself. The manager swung a clumsy punch at Jack's face. Jack ducked, then grabbed the man's arm, twisting it behind his back and pushing him against the counter. The manager struggled, cursing under his breath, but Jack held firm. "Enough!" Jack shouted, his voice echoing through the now silent diner. "You're out of line, and you know it." The surrounding diners sat frozen, their eyes wide with shock and discomfort. Some avoided looking at Jack altogether, while others whispered among themselves, the tension in the air palpable. No one moved to help or intervene, they just watched, their unease evident. Jack released the manager, who staggered back, rubbing his arm and glaring at Jack. "You think you're tough because you're a cop? You think that means you can do whatever you want?" Jack took a step back, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "I just want a meal, like any other customer. I've been coming here for years without any trouble. Why start now?" The manager sneered. "Because now we have standards. We don't need your kind causing trouble here." Jack felt a pang of frustration and sadness. He glanced around the diner, hoping for some sign of support, but met only averted eyes and hushed voices. The isolation he felt was stark and heavy. Without another word, Jack turned and walked out of the diner. The familiar chime of the door sounded almost mocking as he stepped outside into the bright sunlight. His appetite had vanished, replaced by a gnawing sense of injustice and resolve. As he walked to his car, Jack made a silent vow. He couldn't let this stand, not just for himself, but for anyone who had ever faced such blatant discrimination. Driving away from the diner, Jack's mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. He needed to gather evidence to make sure that the manager's actions were brought to light. He thought about Emily, the waitress, and wondered if she might be willing to speak up. He thought about his colleagues at the precinct, wondering how they would react to his story. Jack's drive home was anything but peaceful. His mind churned over the incident at the diner, the blatant racism, and the feeling of isolation that had settled deep in his chest. As he pulled into his driveway, his phone rang. The caller ID displayed the name Captain Roberts. "Wilson here," Jack answered, trying to keep his voice steady. "Jack, it's Roberts. I heard about what happened at the diner. We need to talk." Jack sighed. "Yeah, Captain. It was unexpected. Come by the precinct first thing tomorrow. Internal Affairs is going to want a statement." "Understood, Captain," Jack replied, ending the call. The weight of the situation began to press down on him. He knew an internal investigation meant his actions would be scrutinized, possibly criticized. As a black officer, he had always been walking a tightrope, balancing his duty with the harsh realities of racial prejudice. Now, it seemed that balance had been thrown into turmoil. Just as Jack was about to enter his house, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from a colleague, Sam, offering support. "Hang in there, man. We've got your back." Jack appreciated the sentiment, but he knew not everyone would feel the same. Later that evening, as he sat down to a solitary dinner, the phone rang again. The name Maria flashed on the screen. He hesitated, knowing this call would bring emotional weight. "Hello, Maria," Jack greeted, his voice weary. "Jack, I saw what happened online. Are you okay?" Maria's voice was filled with concern. "I'm holding up," Jack replied, trying to sound reassuring. "It's been a rough day. I can't believe someone would do that. You've always been there for the community, and now it's our turn to stand with you. Don't let this break you." Jack felt a surge of gratitude. "Thanks, Maria. That means a lot. I'm just trying to process it all." "Just know we're here for you," Maria said firmly before they ended the call. The conversation left Jack feeling both bolstered and burdened. He was grateful for the support, but he also felt the weight of expectations from those who looked up to him. As he lay in bed that night, the reality of the situation gnawed at him. He knew that tomorrow would bring questions, scrutiny, and perhaps judgment. The next morning, Jack arrived at the precinct, his mind steeled for the day ahead. The precinct was abuzz with activity, but the usual camaraderie felt strained. He could sense the undercurrent of whispers and the curious glances from his colleagues. "Wilson, in my office," Captain Roberts called out. Breaking through the din, Jack entered the office, closing the door behind him. Roberts motioned for him to sit. "Look, Jack, you know this is going to be tough. Internal affairs is thorough, and this incident is already gaining media traction." "I understand, Captain," Jack replied. "I just want the truth to come out." Roberts nodded. "I believe you, but you need to be prepared. There are going to be people who will try to twist this. Stay strong and keep your head up." As Jack left the captain's office, he felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. He knew he had done nothing wrong, but the public's eye could be unforgiving. After giving his statement to Internal Affairs, Jack decided to visit the local community center. The center had always been a place of solace for him, a place where he could connect with the community on a deeper level. As he walked in, he was greeted by the familiar sounds of children playing and adults engaged in lively conversation. "Jack," Mrs. Linda, the center's director, called out. She was a warm, maternal figure who had known Jack for years. "I heard what happened. How are you holding up?" Jack managed a smile. "It's been tough, Mrs. Linda, but I'm managing. Just needed to be here around familiar faces." She nodded, her eyes full of understanding. "This place is always here for you, Jack. You know that." Jack spent time with the teenagers at the center, helping them with their homework and talking about their own experiences. Their support and the sense of community provided him with a much-needed respite from the storm brewing outside. Jack returned home, the weight of the day still present but slightly eased by the support he had received. As he sat down to a quiet dinner, his thoughts turned to the battle ahead. It was just the beginning, but he was ready to take on whatever came next. The sun had barely set when the community center began to fill up. Word had spread quickly about the incident at the diner, and the response was immediate. Chairs were set up in neat rows, and a makeshift stage was arranged at the front, complete with a microphone. The air was thick with anticipation and the low hum of concerned voices. Jack arrived early, feeling a mix of apprehension and hope. He hadn't expected such a swift and robust reaction, but here it was, his community coming together to discuss not just his ordeal but the broader issue of racial discrimination. As people settled into their seats, Mrs. Linda took the stage. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice steady and warm. "We're here tonight to talk about something that affects us all, racism and discrimination in our community. And we're here to support one of our own, Jack Wilson." Applause erupted, and Jack felt a lump in his throat. He took a deep breath, steadying himself as he prepared to speak. Mrs. Linda continued, "Before we open the floor for discussion, Jack would like to say a few words." Jack walked up to the microphone, the eyes of the room upon him. He could see familiar faces, neighbors, friends, colleagues, and even some strangers who had come to show their support. "Thank you, Mrs. Linda," he began, his voice firm but humble. "And thank you all for being here. This isn't just about what happened to me, it's about what happens to so many people every day, and it's something we need to address together." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "The other day at the diner, I was refused service because of the color of my skin. It was a harsh reminder that discrimination is still very much alive. But seeing all of you here tonight gives me hope. It shows that we're not willing to stand by and let it happen." The room was silent, everyone listening intently. "Now, I'd like to hear from you," Jack continued. "Let's talk about our experiences and figure out how we can support each other and fight against this injustice." One by one, members of the community began to speak. An elderly man recounted his own experiences with racism decades ago. A young mother spoke about the challenges her children faced at school. A local business owner discussed the subtle biases he encountered daily. As Jack listened, he felt a profound sense of connection. These were his neighbors, sharing their pain and their resilience. He realized that their collective strength was far greater than he had imagined. Then, Emily stood up from the back of the room. Jack hadn't noticed her arrive, but now all eyes were on her. She made her way to the front and took the microphone. "Hi, everyone," she began, her voice a little shaky but determined. "I'm Emily. I was working at the diner the day this happened. I saw everything, and I recorded it." A murmur went through the crowd. Jack's heart raced. He hadn't expected this. Emily continued, "I knew it wasn't right, the way the manager spoke to Jack. It was awful. I recorded the conversation because I thought it might be important, and now I want to share it with you." She pulled out her phone, and the room fell silent. She played the recording, and the manager's hostile words filled the air. The tension was palpable, the injustice clear. When the recording ended, the room erupted in applause and support for Emily. Jack felt a surge of gratitude and respect for her courage. "Thank you, Emily," he said, taking the microphone again. "This is exactly the kind of evidence we need. Together, we can make sure that voices like the manager's don't go unchallenged." The forum continued late into the evening, with more stories, more solidarity, and a growing sense of purpose. By the end of the night, Jack felt a renewed determination. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore, he was fighting for his entire community. The courtroom was a stark contrast to the lively community center. It was sterile, with polished wooden benches and a judge's bench that loomed over everyone. Jack sat at the plaintiff's table, his heart pounding in his chest. Emily sat beside him, her presence a quiet reassurance. Their lawyer, Elena Rodriguez, a seasoned civil rights attorney, shuffled through her notes, preparing for the battle ahead. "Remember, Jack," Elena said, her voice calm but firm. "We've got a strong case. Just stick to the facts, and we'll get through this." Jack nodded, taking a deep breath. He glanced at Emily, who gave him an encouraging smile. "We've got this," she whispered. The judge entered the room, and everyone stood. The proceedings began with opening statements. Elena rose, her demeanor confident and commanding. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about more than just one man's experience. It's about a systemic issue that affects countless individuals every day. We intend to prove that the defendant, Mr. Hank Thompson, not only discriminated against Mr. Wilson but also perpetuated a culture of racism in his establishment." The defense attorney, a sharp-dressed man named Richard Barnes, countered with his own opening statement. "Ladies and gentlemen, my client, Mr. Thompson, is a respected businessman who has been falsely accused. This is a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by individuals with their own agendas. We will show that Mr. Thompson acted within his rights and that there is no basis for these allegations." As the trial progressed, Elena meticulously presented their evidence. Emily's recording was a crucial piece, played for the jury to hear. The hostile tone of Thompson's voice, his discriminatory remarks echoed through the courtroom, leaving no room for doubt about his intentions. Witness after witness took the stand. Community members who had experienced similar treatment at the diner shared their stories, painting a clear picture of a pattern of discrimination. Each testimony added weight to their case, and Jack felt a growing sense of hope. But the defense was relentless. Barnes cross-examined each witness, trying to poke holes in their stories and discredit their experiences. When it was Jack's turn to testify, Barnes was particularly aggressive. "Mr. Wilson," Barnes began, "isn't it true that you have a history of conflicts, that you've been known to overreact in situations?" Jack kept his composure. "No, that's not true. I've always done my best to handle conflicts professionally." Barnes smirked. "And yet, you found yourself in a physical altercation at the diner, isn't that correct?" "I was defending myself," Jack replied firmly. "Mr. Thompson pushed me. I acted in self-defense." The tension in the room was palpable. Jack could see the jury members listening intently, weighing every word. He knew this was a critical moment. Elena stood for redirect examination. "Mr. Wilson, can you describe the environment at the diner before the incident? How were you treated by the staff and other patrons?" Jack nodded. "I was treated well by the regular staff and most patrons. But when Mr. Thompson confronted me, it was clear he had a problem with me being there. His words and actions were discriminatory, and he made it clear that people like me weren't welcome. Elena turned to the jury. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. No further questions. As the trial days stretched on, the community's support became more visible. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs that read "Justice for Jack" and "End Racism Now." Their chants could be heard faintly through the courtroom walls, a constant reminder of the broader significance of the case. One afternoon, during a break in the proceedings, Jack and Emily sat on a bench outside the courthouse. The crowd outside had grown larger, and the atmosphere was charged with a sense of urgency. "Do you think we're making a difference?" Emily asked, looking at the protesters. "I hope so," Jack replied. "This is bigger than just us. It's about changing the system, making sure no one else has to go through this." Elena joined them, her face serious but determined. "We're making progress. The jury is listening. We just need to keep presenting our case clearly and confidently." The night was quiet when Emily returned to her apartment. She felt a sense of accomplishment and exhaustion after another intense day at the courthouse. The lights of the city twinkled outside her window as she prepared a simple dinner, the sounds of distant traffic a comforting background. But as she settled down with her meal, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. A sudden sharp knock on the door broke the silence. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone. Carefully, she approached the door and looked through the peephole. A man she didn't recognize stood there, his face partially obscured by a hood. "Who is it?" she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "Delivery," the man replied, his voice rough. Emily frowned. She hadn't ordered anything. She hesitated, then decided to open the door slightly, keeping the chain lock in place. "I didn't order anything," she said. Before she could react, the man slammed the door open with brute force, breaking the chain and sending Emily stumbling backward. Panic surged through her as the man advanced, a sinister gleam in his eyes. "You need to stop," he growled, grabbing her by the arm. "Drop the case against Hank, or you'll regret it." Emily struggled, trying to break free. "Let go of me," she shouted, her voice echoing through the empty hallway. The man's grip tightened, and he pulled a knife from his pocket, pressing it against her side. "This is your last warning," he hissed. "Back off, or next time it won't just be a warning." Fear and pain coursed through Emily as the blade bit into her skin. Summoning all her strength, she kicked him in the shin, causing him to stumble. She took the opportunity to run, but he grabbed her again, slashing at her arm. She cried out, the pain intense and blinding. Suddenly, a door down the hall opened, and a neighbor stepped out, alarmed by the noise. The attacker, realizing he was no longer alone, cursed and fled, leaving Emily bleeding and shaken on the floor. The neighbor rushed to her side. "Emily, oh my God, are you okay?" Emily clutched her wounded arm, tears streaming down her face. "Call 911, she managed to say, her voice weak. Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air. Paramedics arrived quickly, tending to her injuries before transporting her to the hospital. The world became a blur of lights and sounds as Emily fought to stay conscious, her mind racing with fear and anger. At the hospital, Jack arrived in a rush, his heart pounding with worry. He found Emily in the emergency room, her arm bandaged and her face pale but determined. "Emily," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "What happened?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with pain and defiance. "It was a warning," she whispered. "They want us to drop the case against Hank." Jack's fists clenched. "We won't let them scare us. We're in this together, and we'll see it through." As Emily was moved to a private room, security was tightened around the hospital. Officers were stationed at every entrance, and visitors were closely monitored. The place felt more like a fortress than a medical facility, but Jack knew it was necessary. While Emily recovered, Jack continued to gather evidence. The recording Emily had made, along with a new video from a diner patron, had strengthened their case significantly. The video showed the entire altercation from a different angle, capturing Hank's aggressive behavior and racial slurs clearly. Meanwhile, the investigation into Hank's connections revealed a web of corruption that extended far beyond the diner. A city councilman known for his conservative views was implicated, and the scandal began to unravel. The media caught wind of the story, and soon it was all over the news. The news broke early one morning, sending ripples through the city. Hank Thompson, embroiled in allegations of corruption and racial discrimination, had vanished. His sudden disappearance came just as new evidence linking him to a broader political scandal emerged. The media was abuzz with speculation, and the hunt for Hank began in earnest. Jack was at the precinct when he heard the news. "Hank's on the run," Captain Roberts said, his face grim. "We've got teams combing the city. He won't get far." As the days passed, the tension grew palpable. Every lead was pursued with relentless determination, but Hank seemed to slip through their fingers each time. The city buzzed with rumors, and the public's interest in the case intensified. Jack knew they had to find Hank, not just for justice, but for the safety of everyone involved. One evening, a breakthrough came. A tip led the authorities to an abandoned industrial area on the outskirts of the city. The once bustling complex was now a maze of decaying buildings and overgrown weeds, a perfect hideout for someone desperate. Jack joined the team heading to the location. The air was thick with anticipation as they moved in, their steps silent and deliberate. The sound of rustling leaves and distant traffic filled the air, but the tension was so thick it was almost tangible. As they approached one of the larger warehouses, a faint light flickered inside. Captain Roberts signaled for them to proceed with caution. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, every sense heightened, every movement calculated. Inside the warehouse was a labyrinth of shadows and forgotten machinery. The team spread out, each officer covering their assigned sector. Jack's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing rusted metal and piles of debris. Then a noise, the scuffle of footsteps. Jack's pulse quickened. He moved towards the sound, his flashlight revealing a figure darting between the machinery. "There," he shouted, and the chase was on. Hank, looking disheveled and desperate, tried to evade capture, but the officers were relentless. The pursuit was swift and precise, ending when Hank tripped over a piece of metal and fell hard to the ground. Jack and another officer were on him in seconds, securing him in handcuffs. "You're done, Hank," Jack said, his voice steady but filled with a mix of relief and anger. Hank glared up at him, his defiance flickering briefly before fading. "You think this changes anything?" he spat. Jack leaned in, his voice low. "It changes everything." As they escorted Hank out of the warehouse, the waiting media captured every moment. The flash of cameras and the buzz of reporters filled the air. The arrest of Hank Thompson became a major news event, splashed across headlines and broadcast on every network. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Support for Jack and Emily swelled, the community rallied around them, their determination to see justice served stronger than ever. But amidst the victory, there was a sobering reality. The threats against Jack, Emily, and others involved in the case hadn't disappeared. The network Hank was part of was vast and insidious, and they knew that taking down one man was only the beginning. In the days following Hank's arrest, Jack and Emily found themselves navigating a new reality. Security was tightened even further, and their every move was monitored. The danger was still present, but so was their resolve. One evening, as they sat in the relative safety of Emily's hospital room, Jack reflected on the journey so far. "We've come a long way," he said quietly, "but there's still a lot to do." Emily nodded, her expression determined. "We won't stop until it's done, Jack. We owe it to everyone who's ever faced what we have." The support from their community and the truth they had fought to reveal gave them strength. As they looked ahead, they knew they were ready to face whatever challenges lay in their path, united and resolute. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Hank's trial had drawn attention far beyond the local community, turning into a significant event. Jack and Emily sat at the front, their presence a quiet testament to the struggle they had endured and the justice they sought. Order in the court, The judge's voice cut through the murmurs, bringing the room to silence. The prosecutor, Elena, stood up, ready to present the case. Her confidence was palpable as she addressed the jury. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today we seek justice for Jack Wilson and countless others who have faced discrimination at the hands of Hank Thompson. We will present evidence and testimonies that paint a clear picture of systemic racism and corruption. Elena's opening statement set the tone. She methodically laid out the evidence, starting with the audio recording of Hank's discriminatory remarks, then moving on to the video footage from the diner. Each piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin, showcasing Hank's blatant disregard for decency and the law. Jack watched as Elena called the first witness. Emily took the stand, her demeanor calm and determined. She recounted the events at the diner with precision, her voice steady as she described the confrontation. Hank Thompson made it clear that Jack was not welcome. His words and actions were not only discriminatory but also threatening, Emily stated firmly. The defense attorney, Richard Barnes, rose for cross-examination. He aimed to discredit Emily's testimony, but her unwavering confidence made it difficult. "Miss, isn't it possible that you misinterpreted Mr. Thompson's words?" Barnes asked, trying to sow doubt. Emily shook her head. No, his intent was clear. He didn't want Jack there because of his race. Barnes pressed on, but Emily's responses remained consistent and concise. Her testimony was compelling, leaving little room for doubt about Hank's actions. Next, it was Jack's turn. He took the stand, feeling the weight of the moment. He recounted his experience at the diner, detailing the discrimination he faced and his decision to stand up against it. "Mr. Wilson," Barnes began, his tone calculated, "you have a history of conflict, don't you?" Jack met his gaze. "I've always handled conflicts professionally. This situation was different. It was about defending my dignity." Barnes tried to undermine Jack's credibility, but the evidence and the community's support were too strong. The jury listened intently, their expressions suggesting they saw through Barnes's tactics. Throughout the trial, Elena skillfully countered the defense's arguments. She called other victims of Hank's discriminatory practices to testify, each adding another layer to the case. Their stories created a tapestry of injustice that was hard to ignore. The trial's climax came when Elena presented the findings from the corruption investigation. The links between Hank and the corrupt city councilman added a sinister dimension to the case, highlighting a deeper issue of power and prejudice. After days of intense testimonies and legal arguments, it was time for closing statements. Elena stood before the jury, her voice steady and impassioned. "This case is about more than just one man's prejudice. It's about standing up against a system that allows such behavior to flourish. I urge you to consider the evidence and the testimonies. Justice must prevail." Barnes tried to paint Hank as a misunderstood businessman, but his arguments fell flat against the overwhelming evidence. The jury retired to deliberate, and the courtroom waited in tense silence. Hours later, the jury returned. The foreman stood, holding the verdict in his hands. "In the case of the state versus Hank Thompson, we find the defendant guilty on all counts." A collective sigh of relief swept through the courtroom. Cheers erupted from the public gallery, where supporters of Jack and Emily had gathered. The sense of justice finally served was palpable. Jack and Emily exchanged a look of triumph and exhaustion. They had fought a long and arduous battle, and this victory was a testament to their resilience and the community's unwavering support. As they left the courtroom, surrounded by friends and supporters, Jack felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The fight for justice wasn't over, but this was a significant step forward. Together, they had made a difference, and their journey would continue, fueled by the triumph of this moment. The courtroom's echoes of justice had barely faded when Jack and Emily stepped into their new roles within the community. The fight for equality and justice had not ended with the trial, it was merely the beginning of a new chapter. The energy from their victory had galvanized the community, sparking a wave of initiatives and reforms. Jack took on the leadership of a newly formed community liaison team. His years of service as a police officer, combined with his recent experiences, made him an ideal bridge between the police force and the citizens they served. He was determined to foster understanding, trust, and cooperation. "Morning, team," Jack greeted his colleagues at their first meeting, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "We're here to make a difference. Our goal is to listen, to learn, and to act. Let's build a community we can all be proud of." His team consisted of individuals from diverse backgrounds, teachers, activists, business owners, all united by a common purpose. They began organizing forums, workshops, and outreach programs, focusing on everything from racial sensitivity training for officers to youth mentorship programs. Meanwhile, Emily channeled her passion into activism. She collaborated with local organizations to address systemic issues and support victims of discrimination. Her experience at the diner and her role in the trial had given her a platform, and she used it to amplify the voices of those often unheard. At one of the community meetings, Emily stood before a group of young women. "Your stories matter," she said, her voice steady and warm. "We're here to make sure they're heard. Together, we can create change." Her words resonated deeply, inspiring a new generation of activists. Emily's efforts also led to the establishment of a legal aid fund, named in honor of her and Jack's struggle, to provide support for those who couldn't afford legal representation. The diner, once a scene of hostility, had transformed into a symbol of unity. Under new management, it had become a hub for community gatherings. Jack and Emily often visited, finding solace in the place that had once been a battleground. The walls were now adorned with murals and photographs celebrating diversity and resilience. One evening, as they sat at their usual booth, Emily looked around and smiled. "It's amazing, isn't it? How far we've come." Jack nodded, his eyes reflecting a mix of pride and hope. "Yeah, it is. And it's just the beginning." Their relationship had deepened through their shared trials and triumphs. They spent evenings planning their future, dreaming of the changes they wanted to see in their community and beyond. They knew the road ahead would have its challenges, but they faced it together, stronger than ever. The impact of their case reverberated far beyond their neighborhood. Legal reforms were introduced to address the gaps in the justice system that their case had highlighted. Policymakers and activists from across the country took note, using their story as a catalyst for broader change. One day, Jack and Emily were invited to speak at a national conference on social justice. Standing before a packed auditorium, they shared their journey, the obstacles they had faced, and the victories they had achieved. "We stand here today, not just as survivors of discrimination, but as advocates for change," Jack said. "Our story is just one of many, but it shows what's possible when a community comes together. We have the power to shape our future." Emily added, "This isn't just about fighting against something, it's about fighting for something. For justice, for equality, for a society where everyone is treated with dignity and respect." Their words were met with a standing ovation. It was a testament to their resilience and the impact of their work. They left the conference feeling inspired and more determined than ever to continue their efforts. Back in their community, the work continued. Jack and his team launched new initiatives, including a community policing program that fostered positive interactions between officers and residents. Emily expanded her advocacy work, partnering with schools to implement anti-bullying programs and educational workshops. The diner, now a bustling community center on weekends, hosted events that brought people together, potlucks, cultural festivals, and storytelling nights. It had become a beacon of hope and unity, embodying the spirit of the changes Jack and Emily had fought for. As they walked through their neighborhood one crisp autumn evening, the leaves crunching under their feet, Jack and Emily felt a profound sense of accomplishment. They stopped in front of a mural depicting various community leaders, including a likeness of them both, painted by a local artist. "Look at us," Emily said, leaning against Jack. "Part of the city's history now." Jack smiled, wrapping his arm around her. "And we've only just begun." Their journey was far from over, but with each step, they were building a legacy, one of resilience, justice, and the unwavering belief that together they could create a better future for all.